Welcome to season 2 of the Happy Sensory Corner podcast. We talk to like-minded professionals committed to enhancing the quality of life of families living with neurological challenges. We at Mendability are experts in boosting brain development, but we are not experts in nutrition, physical activity, and in this case, education. And today we have Matt McGee, founder of MRM Education. MRM Education is an elite tutoring and college admissions consultancy. Matt and his team work with parents and students to foster academic curiosity and confidence. And Matt, I know I'm going to ask you what you mean by academic curiosity. I'm, no pun intended, curious. And the ultimate goal is to have a report card that will get you into your dream school like MIT and Harvard. And with over a decade of experience as a tutor, consultant, and college admission specialist, his comprehensive methods have helped hundreds of students gain admissions to their dream schools. And Matt is also a member of the National Association for College Admission Counseling. Welcome to the program, Matt.
Thank you for having me, Kim. I'm excited to be here.
And we're also here with Claudie Pomares, the creator of Sensory Enrichment Therapy. She's the Chief Science Officer at Mendability. Sensory Enrichment Therapy is a unique evidence-based brain stimulation program that improves behavior regulation and learning abilities in students, especially in those who struggle the most. Claudie will be doing a short training on a sensory enrichment protocol at the end of our interview, so stick around.
Hello, everybody.
I'm your host, Kim Pomares, CEO at Mendability. And for those who of you who are paying attention, yes, I have the same family name as Claudia, and that's because she's my mom.
And happy to be.
So Matt, tell us your why. Tell us a little bit about what inspired you. Tell us the challenges that you faced. Tell us the bumps in the road and what you're bringing to the table for parents who have children with special needs.
Yeah, for sure. I actually got into education. I fell kind of backwards into it. I was just fresh out of college, and I was trying to kind of break in to a writing career. And so I was very creative in that way. And being sort of an English major and whatnot, I wound up getting a job working with a group of students who had come over as immigrants, and they were doing sort of like an immersion program for the summer where I was going to work with them not only on the language side of things, but I was going to kind of like take them around town, restaurants, movie theaters, just any place where they had to interact with people, and they had to communicate in English. So they would have me there as like a support, as a guide, but as we got further along, I would help them less and less. And then, at the end of the day, we would be able to unpack things, talk about places where they could improve, and kind of do the more like textbook academic stuff. Um, and that experience for me was very enlightening because, it was like a 3-month program. And so you work with these students who are fresh, right? They're brand new. They know no English. And you
Then you
see
know English.
they knew very little English. They were a group of students who were, I think the oldest one was 14 or 15, the youngest one was 9. And so they were fresh. Um, and I
Now,
mean,
did you speak their language?
no, no, they were from China. I spoke less Chinese than they spoke English, right? Because I could say like 1 or 2 words in Chinese. I think they could probably say like hello, goodbye, how are you, yes, no, that type of stuff. I think I can
Yeah.
say no. Um, but so yeah, I was working with them and seeing their progress over 3 months of, like I said, knowing next to no English to now we're here, now we know what it's like, now we're immersed in the culture and being like, oh, we can do this, feeling confident about it. I think it was a really enlightening experience for me. It was a very fulfilling experience because it was about I had taken these people where they wanted to go, right? I served as that guide, and that was incredibly rewarding to do. And from there, the company offered me a more full-time position, working as a tutor and an admission specialist. And
Mm.
easy decision to make because I knew that as a tutor, you're taking students who aren't doing well or they're not they're struggling with school and you're getting them to a point where they feel better about it. With college admissions, you're taking them from anxious and uncertain and you're helping build that certainty, right? So it's always giving you this reward that you get to experience directly, right? Because I'm there the whole process. I'm there from when you come and you don't know English. I'm there when you have no idea what college you're going to. And then I'm there when you feel comfortable speaking the language. I'm there when you open the acceptance letter. And so that was really exciting for me.
So is that what you meant by academic curiosity?
So I think when we say academic curiosity, what we're really trying to do is get away from, there's a student struggling and so let's say they're struggling in math. So let's get them someone who knows math and we'll teach them the math. Because that sort of betrays what might actually be going on. Maybe the student is having an environmental issue. Maybe the student is checked out because of the teaching style. And what we want to do is we want to really get into we want this student to be engaged in school, right? We don't just want to put a band-aid on this wound or this issue. We want to find out what the underlying issue is so that it's not just we're struggling with the material, but now it's we're engaging, we're confident in school, as opposed to just being like, let's teach you how to do the math better than the teacher is.
So how do you apply that? You must have worked with children with special needs.
I have. It's a funny story, or maybe it's not a funny story. From working with this company that I was telling you about, I had switched companies, and I was working again as a private tutor admission specialist. And one day I get an email, and this was actually a different. They had asked me to be a homeschool teacher for these students, and I get an email that says, "Hey, we have two students who we think you'd be great for." And one was a history student, the other one was government and politics. Said, great, no problem, I can do this. And then a few hours after I agreed to do it, they sent me another email that said, great, one of them is on the autism spectrum. The other one is dealing with such high anxiety that her family had to pull her out of school because she couldn't be. She's basically having like low-grade panic attacks. And so we need someone who's going to be able to work with her through this anxiety. And I thought to myself, I don't have any experience in special education. I have no experience working with somebody on the autism spectrum. I have no experience working with somebody who is so anxious that sometimes they can't speak. But because of the way the industry is set up, I didn't really have the wherewithal, the inclination, the resources to turn it down. So I said, okay, let's go. We'll try it. We'll figure it out. And it was a process. It was an experience because while I have always believed that I'm like pretty good at what I do, you're dealing with an entirely different beast, right? In a
Mhm.
normal situation, I could say, hey, take your textbook out, and the kid takes the textbook out. In one of the situations, the girl who had anxiety, I would ask her to take her textbook out, and she would shut down immediately. We would lose an hour because she just didn't want to speak. How do you deal with that? I have no idea.
And how
Um,
old was that student?
that student was at the time she was in fourth grade, so she would have been 9 years old, maybe 10 years old, something like that.
Right.
And so yeah, it becomes this thing where you just have to figure it out. And what I kind of learned was I had to throw everything out the window. Everything I knew, I had to throw it out the window and just say, great, this is the student in front of me. This is what I'm dealing with, and let's kind of solve from this place.
And you said you had another student?
Yeah, another student who was a little bit older, he was autistic and working with government and politics. And in a very similar way,
Hang on.
yeah.
You had a, how old was he? You said 11? Oh, it's a bit
No, so
older,
this
right?
student, this student was 15 or 16 at the time
15. Okay, okay. I was gonna say an 11-year-old doing government and politics. I
in
mean, a
politics.
neurotypical kid would struggle with that subject.
Well, and the irony of this situation was, and so, the dichotomy of these two students is one of them I wound up being the right teacher for her. The other one, it ultimately wound up that I wasn't the right teacher. Because when it comes to government and politics, somebody who is autistic, that is a subject that they will often latch onto and really enjoy and get very into. But as I'm sure you know, a lot of people who are autistic have very rigid belief systems, and they're not always good at having that flexibility or that adaptability. And so one of the things that I work from when I'm, a history teacher or a politics teacher, government teacher, is I don't want to teach you so much what to think. I want to teach you how to think, which is to avoid saying, let's talk about dates and names and this is what happened and then this is what happened. And more from the perspective of we know some facts about what happened. Can we piece together these facts and figure out how we feel about these things? And with somebody on the autism spectrum, that's incredibly difficult to do because they have preconceived ideas and they don't want to move on from their beliefs. They already believe these things. And ultimately, without the training, right, we wound up losing a lot of time because I'm not somebody who is trained to deal with that.
Yeah,
Um,
and Claudie, that makes me think of when we work with kids with autism, often their ability to picture in their minds abstract concepts, but this is also government politics. There's a lot of there's social construct in there. How,
Yeah.
what is your experience with children and trying to teach
Well,
them social constructs?
that's really the right day because I worked with two families today where the issue is inability to have a mental image of abstract um, political ideas. If there are ideas, we cannot really put an image on it. It has to be like you're described, Matt, a feeling, an opinion, and all those things are sophisticated, and that's what probably explained the fact that the kid is rigid. He has made a choice and will follow that line. And a young girl I was working with today had social difficulties because the lack of mental image. It was much younger, it is a much younger little girl, and she is extremely brilliant. She is 4 years ahead of all the other kids. I want to believe that we work hard to have her develop all her talents. But when she's playing with other kids, she suddenly becomes rigid. She does not see the purpose of a game. So she keeps going to one kid and say, "What are we playing? Are we still playing?" And asking questions that distract the other children that don't even understand her questions. And so she has a very horrible afternoon, not having any idea what is really going on, even though she's so smart and is able to solve much more difficult problems that are laid in front of her. She can see it, then she can work with it. And another kid in Germany who has so many different experts. And one of the experts, who is quite a famous psychologist in Switzerland, has started to work with mendability, and we are trying to make problems understandable for him. He's also extremely intelligent. He learned how to read and write on his own. But it's funny you speak about math, Matt, because that kid doesn't understand the problem solving. He can do addition, subtraction, but if there is a problem, he cannot see it. Like, those the train that leaves from that place to that place and so forth. So with those kids, our work with Mendability is to help build. How do you build the mental image? And how do you get the children, well, to understand abstraction and connect? And this is really how we do it. We connect areas that are really strong for them to areas that are less by activities that will make the brain build the bridges. But yeah, it's a problem we are all observing.
And Matt, you said that you had success with one of the students and less success with the other student. Can you tell what worked well and what didn't work well?
Absolutely. I mean, ultimately, I think it came down to being able to lead with empathy and lead with the person, right? So as the case with the girl with anxiety, I eventually said, okay, well, you know what? She's not responding to what I'm doing, so I have to do something completely different here, right? She wasn't responding to, will you take your textbook out? So, uh, for her, I had to rethink the entire paradigm. She used to ask me these personal questions. Now, normally for anybody who's in teaching, you know that personal questions are a little bit of a tough area because you don't want to necessarily like totally shut the student down, but you do have to, maintain a certain level of the relationship. I am your teacher, you are the student, and she's asking me, what kind of an apartment do you live in? How many bedrooms? Do you have a roommate? Do you like your roommate? Do you have any pets? Right. And some of those you can answer and some of those you can't. And so I was kind of trying to constantly move the conversation away from that. But eventually I said nothing else is working. So I said, yeah, I live in a two-bedroom. I have a roommate. Her name is Caitlin. And we started to talk a little bit about my relationship with my roommate. And it made me a little uneasy because I'm here saying, I don't know that I should be sharing these things, but I have nothing else. So we did it. And what I realized is that in almost no time, she asked herself out of questions and was like, okay, what do we want to do in the textbook? And so we were able to start then working, and we would work and work, and then eventually she would kind of hit a point where she was not feeling so great, and then she would go and start like asking me these personal questions again. So I would answer some of the personal questions, and we developed a system whereby we were able to start doing these things. And there was a little bit of give, a little bit of take. Sometimes I would say, I'm not really supposed to answer that, or maybe, I'll answer that if we can do a little bit more work. But it opened her up, and it ultimately wound up being the method that the family used to get her back into the classroom because she was working with other teachers in other subjects that were having similar difficulties, right? If you can't get past the, can we get started today? And so they started saying, yeah, you got to open up to her. You've got to be a person to her. You've got to be somebody who she can trust and who she cares about because whatever it was that was causing her anxiety, anytime she felt like somebody didn't understand her anxiety or understand why she couldn't speak, she then, it exacerbated. It was a positive feedback loop. And so I think the ultimate thing that I learned that I would say, should be required training for probably any teacher, but anybody, especially going into special education, lead with the person's needs first. Because if you don't have the person's needs, you can drive all the academia and learning that you want into them, they're not going to get any of it. If you can't get in touch with the person, if you can't engage the person, it's going to be useless. And I think that actually, interestingly enough, Kim, really kind of goes back to the point about being engaged and academic engagement. I can tell you math, I can tell you history, but if you're engaged in the story, if you're interested, you will learn that at a much higher clip than you will if I'm just forcing it down your throat.
It sounds like this is something that you want to do when you're face to face, because a lot of that human to human interaction, 95% of it is not related to the words that you use, right? The tone of your voice, the use of the space, the even some touching. How do you work mostly one-on-one in person, or do you do Zoom and online? And do you see a difference?
We work almost 99% online. What we have discovered and what I think studies show is that as long as you are one-on-one, it doesn't make a huge difference between online and in person. As soon as you add a second person to that equation, it changes the game entirely. And now you really need to be in person because, if we take the example here, if I'm working with both you, Kim, and you, Claudie, uh, I can communicate with you in person with the simple look. If you look up from me, out of your test or whatever you're working on, I can give you a look saying, it's okay, or yeah, get back to work. We're good. Online, that becomes much more difficult. Who is he looking at? Is he connecting with me? Is he talking to me? One-on-one, though, all those interactions become much more certain. And so it does work in that way. So we are exclusively one-on-one and we are almost exclusively online.
I love what you're saying, and I have a feeling that a lot the parents are taking notes. It's like, okay, make sure if it's one-on-one, Yeah. Um, Claudie, well, how does that, what he was talking about, the girl with anxiety, what thoughts did you have? And I was thinking of protocols that maybe we could share with Matt that he could use, but if it's not in person, do you have some ideas?
Well, once you have a relationship with the person, with the student, and we are working online as well, so I completely understand how you communicate and what you are explaining. A one-on-one cannot be worked any other way than personal and interjections and all those moments of communication. But we have this very, very good protocol that we can do, and you can invite your student to do that involves having something cold. And I think you are maybe drinking warm coffee. It would not work with you. But if you have your student have a bottle of water, and in many places of the world right now, it's very hot, and we have cool
Okay, I've
bottles of
got my
water.
warm mug.
Uh,
I need to find something cold, like an ice pack or something.
Well, anything that would be cold. And I showed a parent today a rock. Go in the backyard, get a rock. They always feel cold. They are not cold, but
Mm.
this is how we respond to them. And holding two different things of different temperature makes the brain sort of settle because we are forcing an information. It's something that is physiological and it's almost a reflex response. For 2 seconds, that's all the brain is doing, processing the information of the temperature, maybe the shape of the object. So you help that student, okay, go back to basis, lower your heart rate. You are now breathing slower because your brain is processing an important information that has to go through. And it's very simple. It's quick.
So you'd be like, here, do me a favor, Jenny. Grab something warm and grab something cold. If they don't have something cold and warm, I've seen you do the same sort of contrast hold and
Yeah.
squeeze with
Mm-hmm.
textures and weights. So if they don't have something with two temperatures, will it work the same to take, I don't know, I've got
Yeah.
like a
A pen.
squishy
A,
piece of paper and crumple it and then hold
yeah.
your iPhone at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
Would that work?
Yes. Yeah. That this is almost as efficient, funnily enough, because there's more information coming from two hands. The brain takes more time and is not as involved. But because there is a process of understanding what we're holding. When we are holding, feeling temperature, there is only that. So that's why it's almost like a reflex processing. It's really, really quick, and the brain does only that for those 2 seconds. But yeah, the holding at the same time two different objects, everybody has something on their desk, and
Yeah.
that will be helpful too. Um, because, as you're saying, an anxiety attack cannot be reasoned because it's not reasonable.
Hmm.
So, it, I have seen people trying to convince the person it's okay, nothing is wrong, is happening. That does not work because it's not about reason. It's about cortisol levels. It's about the chemistry. And we want to repair that or help that with something that is of the same value inside the brain.
It's so funny that you bring up that specific method. I work with a student, he's a college student, so he's older and he's struggled with ADHD for a long time. And when we work together, oftentimes he'll be, what's next? What's next? What are we doing? What are we doing? Right. And he'll wind up forgetting a lot of things and putting it. And often the check-in with him is, can you look at something in the room and then tell me about that thing in the room? Right. And so it's not quite as fully sensory as you're describing. And I love how physical that is, but it's the same, it feels like it's in the same vein of, can we bring you back to something that actually exists here in the present? And it is amazing how quickly that tells the brain, like I just have to focus on this other task.
Mhm.
It, do you have more of those strategies? Um, Let me backtrack a little bit. I had this thought. Anything that we can do to help neurodivergent students or anxious students uh, usually can help every student. It's just we take things for granted with quote unquote regular unanxious students and undivergent students. But we deal and cope with the exact same overload, the exact same distractions. It's just our brain is better equipped to deal with them, but we spend just as much energy having to deal with those things. And so not having to deal with those things, like this technique of look at something in a room or the contrast in temperature, that would help every student. So while I was having that thought, I was trying to formulate a question, but have you implemented some of your other techniques, like this thing that you learned with your anxious pupil to start with a person? It sounds like you're now doing this with all of your students. So are there other things that you learned from working with neurodivergent students that you are now implementing with all of your students?
I would say one thing in particular, which is the idea of accountability. And what I mean by that is that I think there is there is a significant amount of shame that exists within people with disabilities and people who have neurodiversity in that that they're treated by society in a certain way and they sort of feel inherently like, there's something wrong with me. There's something, and that bleeds over beyond whatever their specific disability is, whether it's an array of things or a specific thing. And that winds up bleeding into the rest of their life, where they have this general feeling where they apologize for anything. Where I've been able to have the most success, or where I feel like I connect with students best, and this goes across the board from whether, someone is the teacher of record in a homeschool, whether they're a supplemental tutor or whether they're a college admissions counselor, is taking away the idea of accountability. Because a student is accountable to their teachers and they're accountable to their parents. And so they feel like they're just accountable to all these people in their lives. And as soon as you, as an adult, approach them and go, you don't have anything to apologize for in this situation, you are not accountable to me. I am only here to say we are in this place and we are going to solve for that. If you haven't completed the work you were supposed to do, great. That's where we are. We're going to solve this situation from there. And always letting them know that rather than, feeling like they're going to get disciplined, more like they now have a support system. They have somebody to help them. And I think that that's a little bit more well known in the special ed space because we go like, oh, these people need support in a little bit of a patronizing way sometimes. And that we expect neurotypical students to also feel like they can just handle it on their own and that they don't need that support and that they should be disciplined and they should be accountable. And so connecting with them from that place of, I'm not here to punish you. I'm not here to yell at you or discipline you. I'm just here to help you do whatever it is you need to do. And going back to the beginning, I'm just here to help you get to where you want to go. And I think that's really been the one thing I've taken away from it.
That makes a lot of sense. Claudia, any thoughts on that? This idea of not putting pressure? That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, no expectation beyond what the student cannot do. That's it causes so much anxiety. I can imagine the young lady you worked with a heavy past of people expecting results. And with all the children or adults I am blessed to work with, the point is we are only going to do a little less than what you can do and see where we go from there. And definitely having this feeling of trust and telling the parents as well. I suppose you have this close relationship with the parents so that the team can really be efficient of, okay, let's not expect that result. Let's work on today. What do we have today? And I'm in tune with what you're saying. That is the moment we own. We do not own tomorrow. And when I work with families who deal with autism, the point is not to know why it happened, but to know that today we can help with it.
I,
And
I was
so,
thinking, I was thinking about the stress and cortisol levels and what happens in the brain when you're under that mode, and how that impacts your ability to learn. Could you
Yeah.
could you teach us?
Yeah. And in fact, the little girl I was working with, after talking with the mom for a while and listening to the child is saying no to anything and starts crying if mom says no, and all kinds of little signals that indicate to me as a brain expert, not psychological, that her serotonin level is very low. Serotonin is in charge in our brain of relaxation, learning, all the sensory processing, sleep, feeding. So when any of those is really dysfunctional, you have a good idea of the level of serotonin. And in for that child, I created a whole 2 weeks of serotonin therapy. We need to increase it. One of the issues being those days of the heat. We don't think about the impact of dealing with body temperature and how much it costs in serotonin in our brain. So we can be suddenly depressed or having anxiety simply because we wasted our serotonin doing other things. So the serotonin loss is caused by anxiety. And it's really a vicious circle because that student who is anxious is destroying her serotonin. So less of a trigger will cause the anxiety episode that will destroy more serotonin. So you want to reverse that. And thankfully, we are equipped with our brains with simple things to restore that. As someone who intervened with someone online, and you feel something is going on, and besides an immediate action, uh, what I recommend is, okay, why don't you look at an art slideshow with music? We know that music boosts serotonin and dopamine production instantly in the brain. There's no medication that will do that. So helping our brain restore so that we cannot prevent the anxiety because you don't know the life of your students. They come to you in the life they had that morning, maybe. So, but you can anticipate knowing, okay, there is something that maybe is simply biochemistry, and how can I help the student for our next session? Maybe I can recommend her to do one or two things so that, well, at least her biochemistry in her brain is better, and she will be more available. They will be more available to learning.
Once again, I'm hearing you do this to help neurodivergent and anxious students to build up, to have, extra learning fuel, I'm going to call it, extra feeling calm fuel. Wouldn't that work with everybody? So shouldn't we just tell Matt, hey, start all your sessions with a 2-minute slideshow of art and relaxing music?
Certainly. Yeah, we have schools in different parts of the world using that as a starter of the day for 2 or 3 minutes. They all have full rooms of special need children. So music, aroma to boost dopamine, very, very tiny, simple thing. And suddenly your student is in a different place. She or he is really able to pay attention because you were talking about this kid with ADHD. Uh, that's not yet recognized as a neurological disorder. And this constant apology, it's so sad, but thankfully you know about it, and you already have a wonderful approach to it. But if we can also help that student by boosting his dopamine production and release right at the start of a session, we give as much as we can.
Matt, I'd love to hear some, like, what is the coolest success story, the one that you use every time to give a sense of the power of this academic curiosity and confidence and MIT and Harvard? How do you tell us?
Uh, there are many. It's funny. The very first student who I worked with
Yeah.
uh wanted to go to MIT. And I was very new to this. And I had experienced tutoring, but I did not know how to do this. And his grades were excellent. His grades were excellent, right? But you're talking about MIT, which has like 2 to 3% acceptance rate every year. Maybe some years it goes up to 4. And so you need to really have these perfect grades. And I remember sitting here and I'm part of this team and we're on the phone. He was conferencing in from the East Coast. Uh, and we're talking about like all the extracurriculars and how he's playing this sport and he's doing this club and whatnot. And I had been talking with him at a different time, and he was telling me about this like chemistry project, or not a chemistry, sorry, science of some sort. He was talking about the science project that he had done where he developed, and mind you, this is in 2013. Um, he had developed this primitive AI system that was useful somehow for organizing. I could not at the time explain to you what it did, and I could not today explain to you what it did. It was well above my head. And everybody's worried. The family is worried, and he's worried, and the other people on the team are worried because we don't really have the application that we know, is going to get him into MIT. And I kind of stopped everybody and said, he developed this primitive AI system, which is helping somehow it was helping the library organize their books, the school library, right? I said, he's doing this thing for his school. He's developed this thing which is helping people do this. Why don't we lean into that? Right? So we did lean into that, and he went to his town library and they implemented the system there. And we focused his essay on all about how he had built this thing and how he had this degree of intellectual and academic curiosity to go beyond what he was doing in his courses and say, this is what I learned with my courses, and this is how I applied it. This is how I'm going beyond, and I'm doing things that exist, right? 2013 AI is it's barely even a thing. Um, and so we took that, and that was the theme that we built with his application, and that got him into college.
Hmm.
Uh, that got him into MIT, which was, I think, the most exciting thing because he really showcased that he was this person who was more three-dimensional than the application allows for. A beautiful moment that I had with a neurodivergent student who was not the most social person, but lived out in Sonoma County in a very rural area. He spent a lot of time walking through national parks and state parks and whatnot. And one day he discovered, again, I'm going to get this wrong because it's more specific than I can explain. He discovered that there was a group of fish or a type of fish living in a place that it was not supposed to be living in. And he alerted local biologists to the fact that there were these fish who did not belong here. And how could they possibly have gotten here? Because these were fish who went to the ocean, but there was no way for them to go to the ocean. And when he started working with the biologists, they realized that actually, because these fish had no way to get to the ocean, it made them a completely different species. And so we were able to write about how this student had discovered a brand new species of fish and then worked with local biologists to discover what that meant for the local ecosystem, right? And this is a student who before this did not think that college was going to be an opportunity because he was autistic, right? And so it's moments like that where we really try and kind of like mine your experiences and mine what has happened to you and mine who you are as a person beyond just your grades, uh, to show colleges that you are this fully three-dimensional person and this is what you love to do and this is what you're gonna do one day.
That sounds like a lot more than tutoring.
In that way, it is more than tutoring, right? The tutoring, I think the tutoring comes in that if you don't, you could have a wonderful experience like that. But if you have C's, Harvard is still not going to take you, right? So you need to meet a certain bar. And so that's where the tutoring comes in to make sure that we're still kind of like keeping you engaged and getting you the grades that you need because you do need both halves of the equation.
Yeah. So tutoring, anybody can do tutoring. What you're talking about is all this extra stuff that then tips you over the edge and makes you that 0.1% that makes you all of a sudden MIT and Harvard eligible.
Yeah, yeah. It allows you to kind of like punch above your weight. and maybe it's not Harvard or MIT. Maybe you really don't excel in the classroom, but you do wonderful things outside of it. So great. Harvard and MIT, maybe not, but that doesn't mean you can't get into a second tier school like BU that maybe your grades wouldn't have gotten you into before. So it's all about just kind of being able to use the person that you are, to use your experiences and all the lovely things about you and be able to show the college that.
That sounds great, and I love how we were able to bring in some of our sensory enrichment during the conversation. I feel like this was an excellent podcast. It's a bit selfish. If it was a podcast I was listening to, I would love that podcast. It's an awesome podcast episode, right, everybody? Thanks, Matt, for being part of this for our journey with our Happy Sensory Corner in special ed. Thank you, Claudie. And everybody, we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Kim.